Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our live tutorial on 3 ways to improve your requirements process with QVscribe. My name is James Carr, and I'll be happy to, we're happy to have you here today. So first, I'll just dive in with what we're going to be covering today. First, we'll talk a little bit about wolves and how they can change the flow of rivers. There is a connection back to requirements with that. And then the 3 main points that we had from the beginning, quality first with QVscribe for teams, on how QVscribe as an application can help teams get on the same page with the way their requirements are written and actually put quality ahead of everything else. So at the beginning, from the earliest stages of your development, how you can use QVscribe to make sure that everybody is on the same page with the meaning of the requirements, even as they move through the process of approving, adding, or removing requirements as you go through the process. So we'll start with quality first, and then we'll look at tailoring QVscribe to your unique needs. So there have been previous webinars that we've hosted over the last few years that have covered kind of an overall product demo of how to use QVscribe and how it interacts with your process. What we'll talk about today is a little bit different as we look into actually tailoring that and making it fit, particularly in the context of a larger organization, but certainly individuals that would be using it would be able to take advantage of that as well. And then lastly, we're actually doing a bit of a new product announcement today where we're looking at QVscribe and how it interfaces with different requirements management tools. So we have direct integrations with some of the most popular requirements management tools available. Those will be launching in the next month, and we're really looking forward to showing you what that looks like as well. So stay on board for that. So the reason that we're talking about the wolves, I particularly like wolves because I have 2 dogs that are very wolf-like. That's them on the left. On the right-hand side, you'll see the actual wolf. That's not my dog on the right-hand side, but we'll get back to that in a second. So the QRA team here today, I'm James Carr. Like I said, I'm on the sales team here at QRA, and we also have from our marketing team, Olivia Kenny as our chat host. So as we're going along, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A section there, and we'll address those as we go through. If there are any that we can't cover on the call today, we will follow up with you by email to answer those as well. At the end of this, you will receive an email with a quick survey. It's just to get feedback on these. We're always trying to improve them, make them relevant for as many people as possible. So it's just a quick 3-question survey. This one, we added a question about which authoring tools you're currently using with your requirement process. But basically, it's just, would you recommend this to your colleagues? And what's the reason that you give for that answer? So all the personal information there from the time that you filled out the form to join this will auto-populate there. So it's just a quick survey. And once you fill that out, we will send you a copy of this presentation as well if you want to share that with others on your team. And we will make a recording of this available afterwards as well. So some previous related tutorials, I mentioned a few minutes ago that we will have, in our previous ones, we do more of a product demo where we actually show working through a requirements document. That's what we did in that, the one on the right, automating the NCOSI guide for writing requirements. So if you'd like to see kind of hands-on day-to-day what that looks like working with QVscribe, you can see a demo in that one. And in the first email that it went out, we also mentioned that we were going to review the 5 common mistakes and how to avoid them when authoring requirements. That webinar was hosted by Rebecca Labby. That was our most recent one. So if you do fill out that survey for us, we'll send you a link to that recording as well so you can catch that up. But what are the 5 common authoring mistakes? They are misunderstanding who the true stakeholders are, not building requirements in a collaborative way, not realizing the requirements is an iterative process, a general lack of clarity in the way the requirements are defined, and another common mistake is never freezing the requirements, so not getting to a point where you say, nope, that's it, this is the specification for this project, so it can move ahead. So if you'd like to learn more about those 5 common mistakes, I invite you to check out that webinar. If you fill out the survey after this one, we'll make sure that you have that link and it's easy to access, and feel free to reach out to us by email as well. So to get started, how wolves can change the flow of rivers. I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen here for a moment. So this illustration actually comes from an experience over the last century with Yellowstone National Park. So it's one of the largest national parks in the US. It was actually the first national park in the world, and it covers 9,000 square kilometers. So in the early 1900s and the 1920s, hunting wolves was very popular in Yellowstone National Park, and the idea was, and this was common across the U.S. and around the world at that time that predators were bad. So if you wanted the other creatures that were in your habitat to survive, your best chance was to remove some of those predators. So there was a mass kind of removal of wolves from Yellowstone National Park for that purpose, to allow the other animals, the deer and the elk, to have a better chance of survival. And so the last wolf that was native to Yellowstone National Park in that area was actually killed in 1926, I believe it was, in the late 1920s. And what resulted over the next 10, 20 years that they saw was that the overall vegetation, the health of the park as a whole, actually drastically reduced. So they found that it was becoming barren, that the fields were drying up, that the elk and the deer were actually overrunning the park. So they had this problem of overpopulation. So over the next little while, environmentalists did studies and tried to find that right balance. So they tried relocating some of the elk and the deer, but they actually found that they weren't able to reverse the effects of what had happened by removing the wolves. So the way that this ultimately relates to requirements is that the top-down impact of, it wasn't just that the deer were impacted, but the fact that the deer were overrun had this massive chain reaction that went all the way through the ecosystem. So they studied this as early as the 1960s. Studies were done that actually indicated that maybe reintroducing wolves into that habitat would be a good idea. It wasn't until 1995 that they actually took that step. They took just under 20 gray wolves from up here in Canada and brought them down and introduced them into the Yellowstone National Park in a few key areas. So they did this over a period of years. They had a couple of different iterations of that. And the results were actually immediate. So it wasn't, of course, there's going to be the process, the predator-prey relationship, where the wolves are going to help control the population of the elk and the deer, but it actually changed their behaviors right away. So just by making this change with the wolves being present, it changed the way that the deer and the elk moved around the park and where they were able to go. So as a result, a lot of the trees that had started to deteriorate and had been eaten, and the new ones weren't able to grow up, those trees started to flourish again. So that introduced the beavers were now coming back, and their population was thriving because they're the engineers of the animal kingdom. So they were able to cut down those trees and build their dams. And of course, that creates another whole ecosystem, or it's a habitat for many other creatures. So then you have ducks and other creatures that were able to move in there. Reptiles and fish and muskrats and all these things are able to move into that habitat as well. So there's this trickle down effect that happens. And another thing that the wolves did was to actually take the population of coyotes and help control that as well. So they're competing for the same food. Wolves would be in certain areas that would push the coyotes into areas where they had the upper hand, so thicker brush, steep hills, and the coyotes would generally avoid the big open fields. So as a result of that, when there was scavenging opportunities, so leftovers that the wolves left behind, then you could have eagles and hawks and other scavengers that could come in that were previously stopped by the coyotes. So there was this massive trickle-down effect that ended up going all the way down to, with the reduction of coyotes, you had more badgers, rabbits, foxes, weasels, these types of things that would start to repopulate the area. And then ultimately, these changes actually restored the rivers in the Yellowstone National Park. So of course, there's debate around this. It's not a strictly black and white thing where it's all at the cause of the wolves, but they were a big part in that process of rejuvenating that park. And so the way that the rivers changed was these aspen trees that had previously been not able to grow because of the overpopulation of deer and elk in these areas where the wolves were present, that kept the deer and the elk away. So those trees were allowed to grow up. And when they grow up, that actually fortified the banks along the rivers and changed the course. So now the rivers were deeper, and you have the dams that the beavers were building. And it actually changed so that the rivers were much more healthy. So the erosion stopped. The rivers changed their course in large part due to the introduction of these wolves. So this is a positive take on change. It's sort of the opposite of what happened in The Lion King. Where the predators took over and it went too far. I liked the new movie, but I gotta say they ruined Scar for me. Scar was like one of my all-time favorite cartoon characters because he's had this like dark comedic, charming kind of vibe to him, and the new Scar was just no good. And the guy who did Mufasa's voice, it was the same guy. The same guy did Mufasa's voice in the old one and the new one, but in the old one, like the original cartoon, Mufasa was way better. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. But how this relates back to requirements is that the requirements are the top of the food chain. Everything else that happens throughout your supply chain and the vendors that you work with, and even within the dynamics of your own company, they all come back to the requirements. What are we actually trying to build? What does this project entail? What are the best practices that we're trying to follow? If those are communicated clearly, then there are effects that last through the whole supply chain and through your whole design process that that you might not expect. You might not see the direct correlation. So the reason I wanted to share that story in the beginning is to start us out. I want to be thinking about your requirements process, not from the perspective of like, it takes this many hours to write requirements and we want to cut that down. Or, we're going to write higher quality requirements so that we can pat ourselves on the back and say, wow, our organization really has our requirements together. Because there's an impact beyond just the way that the requirements are written and where they're written, because these are used throughout the supply chain. So throughout your own development process and other partners that you're working with, those requirements documents are referred to often through that process. If there ends up being a dispute down the line between the scope of work that was involved, they're going to be pulling out the requirements to say, look, this is what you asked for and this is what we delivered. So if there's a misunderstanding around what that means, or maybe your requirements are written in a way that could be interpreted in multiple ways, then that introduces problems down the line. So by improving our requirements process, it's not just a matter of just doing it for the sake of doing it, of it being one thing that we want to be good at. There's a trickle-down effect that impacts your organization across many different levels. So from our perspective, and we've helped teams over a number of years work with their requirements process to improve them, and QVscribe has been a part of that. So just a few things that our customers have noted since using QVscribe that I think is relevant. One is that even if it's just an individual using it, you will get the benefits of having less time spent on your requirements. So we have customers that have been using it. We hear things all the time like, we were expecting this project based on past ones that we've done, revisiting specifications or reviewing documents that need to be updated. This set of documents should have taken us 6 months and we did it in 3, or we did it in 4. You have individual tasks like going through a document to make sure imperatives are used correctly or that proper units are used. QVscribe is up to 3 times faster, sometimes more actually than 3 times faster in doing those manual tasks as well, with some benchmark tests that we've done. Next level down. So here, when you get into actually reviewing those requirements, requirement meetings are cut down. Regularly, we have customers report, between 50 and 75%. There's a case study from Ultra Electronics on our website that the actual time spent reviewing their requirements when they're using QVscribe to improve the quality has actually improved by 75% overall. So there's cost savings there, and also the time is spent reviewing the quality of those requirements. So what's coming out on the other end is better. Actually, I had this very case study in my hand at a trade show not long ago, and I mentioned that we had been working with a particular group in Ultra Electronics, and the person I was speaking with said, oh, actually, we just completed a project with them. And I said, well, how did that go? And they said, well, actually, now that I think about it, things went really smoothly. It seemed like everybody was on the same page. There was an understanding of how that went. So from that perspective, the impact went beyond just the organization, but actually now it's positively affecting their relationship with others in their supply chain. So when you have a defined process, and this isn't necessarily just with QVscribe, but any defined process, you're going to end up with greater clarity for the junior members that are following that process because they know what's expected of them. They're not going to get everything that they've done redlined by a senior team member that goes back and says, no, you should have said it this way, or you should be fixing this. And there's sort of a friction that happens there that we see all the time. And for the people that are normally responsible for doing those reviews, by saving that time, you're actually freeing them up to do other things as well. So again, with the trickle down effect. So another common occurrence that we hear is that there's just fewer questions and clarifications. So that could be internal or external discussions, but the number of times spent clarifying the requirements and finding out this doesn't actually mean what you thought it meant, or having to go back and redo the work, that's a big area of potential time savings as well. So for those of you that aren't familiar with QVscribe, we will get into what that actually means and how it works. But we're going to be looking at 3 ways today that you can save time and improve the quality of your requirements with QVscribe. So I'll go back to my screen share here for a moment and jump in. So as a quick overview, QVscribe currently integrates directly within Microsoft Word and Excel. A little bit later, I'll show you our new platform that's just about to release for Doors Next Generation, Polarian, and JAMA. So these same results that you see here within Word and Excel will be delivered directly within those requirements management tools without any export or import involved. And basically the way that it works is QVscribe helps control the language that's used in requirements. So in the process of writing them, it's basically like a coach. So as somebody is writing their requirement, they have your standard for how your organization has decided to write requirements. The standard configuration that we send with it is based on best practices found in the INCOSE guide. So that's from the International Council of Systems Engineers. So there's best practices for what makes a high quality requirement. And what you'll see over on the right-hand side is each requirement has been given a score between 1 and 5 based on the language that's used in that requirement. So if a user were to go in and click on any of the individual requirements here, you see that this one gets a score of 3 out of 5. And there's a couple of vague words that are present here. So you can see if I hover over that, I'll actually get feedback on how I can fix that. So that's how it's like a coach. So everybody is working off the same configuration. Managers are able to go in and make changes, which we'll show you in a moment. And then those are automatically pushed to the entire team. So you're not stuck with just the way that QRA or the INCOSE guide recommends that you write requirements. You can fine tune that for your industry, for unique types of documents that you're working on, and really taking those best practices for requirement writing and applying them across any sort of technical document that you're working on. And by standardizing that language and standardizing the way that your requirements are written, it makes it smoother across the whole process. So in this example within Word, as somebody has these issues highlighted, you can sort and filter it in different ways, which we've covered in different tutorials. So if I wanted to see every requirement, for example, that contains issues of vague words, I can filter those out. And if I wanted to look at any instances of what we had in the other one, non-specific temporal words. So saying that there's a time constraint, but not specifying what that is. So saying that something will happen temporarily or that something will happen immediately, as is the case in this high-level adaptive cruise control specification, that language is flagged because it's an indicator that you're not being specific enough, or you've added extra words that are just going to complicate the requirements. So making your requirements more concise, more clear, is the main purpose of QVscribe. And you can see here, I can actually go in and make changes here within Word itself. I can go in and edit that requirement. I can reanalyze it based on the changes that are made. So I can slowly work through this, and as the document improves in clarity, I'll get an overall quality score gets updated here. And I can improve each requirement one at a time. So that's looking at each individual requirement. We also do a consistency analysis that looks at all of the terms that have been used in this document. We do a unit analysis that's pulling out all of the units that have been used. And then lastly, we do a similarity analysis that shows you similar requirements side by side. So you can easily identify if you've repeated the same information in different parts of the document, or if there's potential contradictions. If you have two requirements that are very similar, maybe there's only one number that's different between them, those would be very, very similar in what's written. And it would actually show you side by side what those differences are. So that's the similarity analysis, and you can control the threshold for that as well. But what we want to focus on here is the best way to actually leverage this for a team. So this is going to be a little bit different than what we normally cover on these live tutorials. So I'll give a couple of examples of best practices from existing customers of ours. One is to implement QVscribe into the actual approval process. So instead of just making the tool available and say, hey, Jim, take this and this will help you write better requirements, and good luck with it. The organizations that have had the most success with using QVscribe have actually put this in place to say, no, until you run it through QVscribe and achieve a score, and there's different levels that you can use for this, but until you achieve a certain score within QVscribe, you actually can't submit this for review. So as a result, the quality needs to get to a certain level before it's even submitted for those reviews. And so I'll give you one quick example of how you might use that in a normal interaction. So if I go back to the full list of requirements here, this is just a really short, high-level example here, but we have requirements between, some are 5 out of 5, some are as low as 1. So you might have a rule for your organization that says, we don't want any requirements that are 1 out of 5 because that represents a really high risk. That means that you have a problem with the imperative statements. So you have requirements that say, it shall do this and it must do this. Well, those should be in two separate requirements, so it gets a low score. As a result, on the other side, you can have requirements that don't have an imperative. So, instead of actually saying what shall or must happen, you don't have anything that's saying what's actually required. So it's just sort of a note or a comment. It's not actually written as something that's clearly described as a must. So you could say, you got to make sure that you have none that are 1 out of 5 because that represents too high of a risk. But maybe there's some language that in context is okay. So maybe you're describing the maximum value of something, and instead of just saying, when it reaches the maximum, you actually say reaches the maximum value of 15. So that word maximum would be flagged, but in that case, it might be okay. So the way that we would recommend that you use this in a context like that is you can generate these custom PDF reports. So what some companies have done is when the requirement is submitted for review, they actually will submit a report excluding the 5 out of 5 scores. And so when I click create here, this will create a PDF and only show me requirements that don't have a score of 5 out of 5. So as a result, the manager, instead of reviewing every requirement at the beginning to check for quality, to check for proper use of imperatives and things like that, it's just reviewing the issues that are still outstanding after the user has had a chance to go through and refine it. So they'll be able to get this report that still includes the 5 out of 5. So you'll see this particular document currently has 36% 5 out of 5. So we've got a ways to go here. And then we have a number of them that are a 3 out of 5. So if a manager was reviewing this document, instead of looking through the entire document, they can actually focus first on the requirements that still have outstanding risk or potential risk. So those will be highlighted here like this, and the user would be able to say, no, in this context, I actually think that be able to is the right way. So then the manager can have a conversation with them and say, according to the NCOSI guide, this is a superfluous infinitive. So basically they're extra verbs that aren't necessary to have this requirement. So how can we fix this to remedy that issue? So then it's only the outstanding issues that are there. Maybe there'll be other ones that you look at and say, yeah, this is okay, this one's okay, but the result is you're actually improving the quality first. So by the time you go into that review meeting where everybody's actually supposed to be looking at the content of these requirements, you reduce those extra conversations that need to happen around, have I actually included the right words here? Or, hey, you should have worded this differently, or you shouldn't include that phrase. QVscribe is taking care of that in a coaching role first. So basically one decision is made in the first place about this is how our team is going to write. And then QVscribe helps automatically enforce that across the rest of the group. So that's one way that a team can use it together. What I want to talk about next is the actual configurations themselves. So once you're into using QVscribe within your organization, you might have, you might use the standard QRA configuration from the beginning, but you might want to fine tune that for specific projects that you're working on. So if I open the configuration button here, you'll see that this actually shows me what words are included in these different issues that are flagged. So some are keyword based. So we're looking at, vague words or different vague terminology that makes it difficult to verify the requirement. These are all based on the NCOSI guide, but you can control add or remove words from these lists as you wish. So for a large organization with QVscribe for Teams, only certain members would have ability to actually go in and make changes to these configurations. But when they make a change to the configuration, that's automatically pushed across all users. So the way that you can use this as a team, you might have one standard configuration that's suitable for your typical requirements document, but maybe you're working on a request, like an RFP, a request for proposal. So you're working on this RFP and there's particular language that is acceptable for maybe a normal requirement, but for your RFP, it might be a little bit different. So then you could go in and create a different configuration that includes the specific language that you want to include. So there's these different categories here, negative imperatives, which are flagged as being unacceptable. You have your list of vague words here. That this is the standard list, and then you can add or remove from that. Optional escape clauses, and each of them gives a description of what that warning means, and we include some documentation along with it that can help you understand each of those warnings as well. But the idea is the decision is made once on, for this type of document, this is the language that we want to use. and then that's automatically enforced. So you don't have to have that conversation over and over again. And every time you bring a new person on, you don't have to teach them all of the nuances of, okay, this is the language that we use for this document, but this is what we use for the other ones. So definitely as a best practice and a way to keep everybody on the same page with QVscribe for Teams, create different configurations, because your regular users will be able to go in from this dropdown and choose which configuration is suitable for the project that they're working on. So then when you generate those reports, it shows which version of the configuration and which configuration was used, and that helps keep everybody on the same page. So when you come to those different gates that you go through in the review and the approval process, before you get into the meeting where you're reviewing these requirements together, they've already reached a certain level of quality. So that elevates the conversation so that you're not just talking about your best practices and revisiting things and saying, oh, well, I heard this over here that we shouldn't say it this way, or he writes in this style and I write in this style. It keeps everybody on the same page. And when you have consistency and kind of a standard way of writing your requirements across the organization, make sure that everything is being kept in check. So of course, the more people that adopt this, the better. But this isn't an all or nothing approach. The result of one individual person using QVscribe or one team within an organization using QVscribe, you don't have to have total buy-in from everybody to say, we did it this way and now we're doing it that way. Each individual person that starts using it, it ups the quality, it ups the clarity. And then, of course, the more people that do start using it, then those benefits are expanded across that larger group. So in terms of adoption, the potential is there to be able to just have one person pick up and start using it on a project, and then you can weigh for yourself for the amount of time that we saved writing the requirement and the effects as this goes through the rest of the design life cycle. Are we getting a benefit out of using this? And what we've heard from our customers is that they love the opportunity to have their requirements automatically checked. And so that's a couple of ways that you can use QVscribe for Teams in that context. I will stop now and just see if there were any questions. Feel free to submit your questions on the chat if you have any as we go along, and we'll jump into the next section here. So that's how to use QVscribe for Teams to get everybody on the same page and keep them there. So that's how it's being used today. And the idea with QVscribe, and you've seen this in our other tutorials as well, is that you, the professional, the people on your team that are writing requirements, they understand the project overall. That's something that QVscribe doesn't do. You understand the project, so you're authoring the framework of what requirements should be included and what it is that you're trying to say, and then you can solve problems as they're being presented. Where QVscribe comes in is it helps apply the principles or the best practices of requirement writing. It helps authors to clarify what they mean, to make sure that they're being specific enough in their requirements, and it helps them identify problems that a human has a very difficult time finding in a document. So for example, we've run some tests on the amount of time that it takes for somebody to manually review a document looking for something as simple as proper use of imperatives. So to make sure that every requirement has a shall or a must statement in it, and only one statement. The amount of time that it took with QVscribe was about 3 times less than it would take to do manually. And we had a similar comparison with manually checking for proper use of units. So if somebody to manually go through and identify every time a unit is used to make sure that there's a consistent unit of measurement. And what's interesting here is as the document size increased, the amount of time that it saved actually increased more and more. So manually, the longer the document, the longer it takes to do this. Whereas with QVscribe, even on large documents, you can quickly review all of the times that units have been used to make sure that they're used consistently. So that's that upfront time savings of it just taking less time in general to write your requirements from the beginning. And then later on, you get the benefit of having those high quality requirements included. So just to go back for a second to the configuration discussion too, another way that it can be used that I forgot to mention is those different configurations can be used for different stages of development. So if you're developing a really complex document, you might start with just user needs. So they're not even requirements yet, but you need to document all of the needs that are all the requests from your stakeholders of what they would like this product to do. So maybe there's language that's appropriate for that level that isn't appropriate for your regular requirements document. So drawing that line now is very difficult because you're trying to get people to remember all of these best practices. This is the way that we write requirements, and this is our approach. So as you go through these different stages, this type of drawing the distinction between this language is appropriate here but not appropriate there is a very tedious manual process. So with QVscribe, you can have, this is the configuration that we're using for the user needs stage. So maybe the imperative isn't a shall or a will statement. Maybe it's saying, if it's a request, then it's saying, maybe it's written in a different format that's saying, the user requests X, this feature or that feature. So that's one way that it can be controlled. And then as you move further down the line, the language becomes more restrictive in what you actually want to communicate. So saying that something needs to be done immediately, for example, would not be acceptable at that level. So you then have control as the document is being developed to have specific language that's appropriate for where it is in the development process. We do have a question here. Olivia's gonna read it for me, I think.
So the first question is, for the Word version of QVscribe, do all the requirements have to be in paragraph format? How about table format and only applying the analysis on certain table columns? Does it apply analysis only on the final version if track changes are turned on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So the question is, when you're working with a Word document, is it only in paragraph form or can you use tables as well as a part of that? And if you're using track changes in the process, does it just look at the final version of it? Basically, with track changes, QVscribe will look at what is currently being displayed. So what we recommend is when you actually run the analysis, you can have track changes on, but we recommend not showing the markup when you run the analysis, because if you make a change and it crosses that out, QVscribe will be looking at all of the text that's included there. But in terms of using tables, depending on the way that it's structured, tables, many of our customers do use tables if they've exported from a requirements management tool, for example. And those work very well because typically you have a unique identifier or next to the table that actually has the description of the requirement, it'll be highlighted with the word requirement there. And our tool can actually automatically find where the requirements are within that using a feature we have called Requirement Finder. And in the table format, that works well. So it grabs everything that's on that line. And there's actually a setting within the configuration to control how you want it to use the tables, whether each table should be read as its own requirement or if each cell within that should be treated as its own requirement. So you do have some control there as well in how you work with it. So hope that answers your question there. Keep them coming as we go along. We welcome your questions as we go. We'll get my screen share back up here. So looking at how this actually plays out in the real world. So going back to that cascading effect. So we're talking about not just saving time in the process of writing your requirements, but actually the impact that comes from improving your requirements process. And this is James Hogg, the General Manager of Systems Engineering with Shell. And he shared this with us recently on a call. QVscribe is helping Shell engineers write high quality requirements to ensure clarity across our projects and supply chain. This is the important part, which significantly reduces the number of questions and clarifications from our suppliers and enables more efficient execution of projects. So this is at the top of the oil and gas food chain, we'll say. These specifications make their way down throughout the supply chain. So for every question that's asked to in the major companies or the super majors in oil and gas, there are probably at least 10 that things are not sure as they read them and the question just goes unasked. But even with that being said, when a requirement or a specification document that a company is working with is unclear, the number of requests is in the thousands that these companies get. And there are particular people within these organizations, especially in the oil and gas industry, that are responsible for these specifications. So when there's a question or a clarification that comes in, it goes back to those engineers. And these are typically senior engineers with a lot of experience and have a established role in the company. So a lot of time is then wasted not on the work that they're doing, but they actually spend this time answering questions and clarifying and redoing a lot of the work that's already been done with these questions and clarifications. So one of the trickle-down effects that Shell has seen is significantly reducing the number of questions and clarifications they get from their suppliers because they're now writing their requirements in these clear singular statements that are easy to understand because they don't include vague language and that they're consistent in the way that they're presented. So What that means for a large organization, of course, is time savings as well as improvements down the line as well. So you're writing the requirements faster, you're getting that consistency, and then down the line, there's these other kind of unseen benefits that you get from just improving that process overall. In the medical device world, something that we often see is that requirements are required, of course, as part of the approval process of going through the regulatory approvals that are needed for, any safety critical device. So it needs to go through those different approval processes. But in that process, requirements are a part of it. But the requirements that are included in that project end up being just specific to that project. So if they're not singular, if they're not traceable, if you're not using a system like a requirements management tool to be able to reuse those requirements and reapply them, then you end up doing all this work to generate a document because you have these deadlines that you're trying to meet, and you're trying to get through regulatory, and you have all these different pieces that are moving together. And so you don't have time to actually write clear, concise requirements that are easy to use later on because you're just trying to get this project out. So with QVscribe, it allows organizations that are working with those sorts of deadlines to actually be able to go in and improve the quality and the singularity of those requirements, make sure that they're not in conflict with other requirements within that document, so that on the next project that's similar to that, you can actually use these requirements. And if there's one that applied well to that project and you're moving it into a new one, the requirements are a lot more reusable because there's a standard format that's been used, and it's not so specific to that individual project that they're working on. So the end result of this is that, if you're using a tool like this, and it is a part of the bigger picture, right? You're helping your team learn how to write better requirements. QVscribe helps enforce that. But by improving your requirements process, there are all these trickle-down effects that you experience down the road. So some new features that are in development now that are coming soon for QVscribe. Next, we're going to talk about the direct integrations with Doors Next, with Polarian and with JAMA. Included in that is multi-platform sharing. We have a lot of existing customers that are in the process of migrating to these requirements management tools. They've been in some legacy systems and are moving over to these web-based platforms, or maybe moving out of a document-based approach. So we're talking sometimes with hundreds of thousands of specifications, and it takes time to get everybody moved over. So as a part of this process, configurations that are made within Word and Excel are also accessible within these other tools. And there's also the ability to share licenses between those. So if you have some teams that are working in Word and Excel and others that are using a dedicated management system, you can have that shared common language between them, because QVscribe for Teams, which is the server application that manages the sharing of licenses and configurations, interfaces with both of those tools together. So multi-platform sharing is a big part of our vision going forward. Another feature that we've started to develop is organizational standards definition. So helping your group work with that configuration that you have to figure out what's the best fit for your organization. How should you actually be writing your specs? How do you control which language is used? Things like that. And with that, we're giving more control to large organizations to be able to control the types of warnings that come up, and customize the scores that are shown, and give unique warnings for particular words, instead of just the category that's listed. So all of these tools are designed to help teams get on the same page and to align QVscribe with the existing processes that they have. So there's a mixture right now where there's some of our organizations that we deal with have really well-defined processes of requirement writing that's typically a manual review process to get to that level of quality. But what's happening is they want to take those standards that they've spent time thinking about and developing as a team, and then working with QVscribe to put those together so that QVscribe is actually enforcing their own rules. Others, this is sort of a new journey for them. So they're getting into improving the quality of their requirement. They're getting into standardization in the process of writing their requirements, and QVscribe is a part of that process for them as well. But the groups that we're looking for right now, and the organizations that we want to connect with, are companies that have recognized the importance of requirements. So if you have a push to improve your requirements through a requirements management tool, and you see the benefits that have come from working with that, then the next level is to improve the quality of your requirements as well, to get people on the same page with the language that's being used in those as well. And I like to illustrate it this way. And if you have any questions, this is a good time again to start writing, because we're getting near the end. But writing requirements in natural language is really the problem that we're looking to solve here with QVscribe. So for example, if you're writing requirements within a Word document, At the end of the day, it's you, the keyboard, and a blank space. And the user can write whatever they want in that space, which is great because in natural language, you can define complex ideas. You can specify exactly what it is that you want. But the downside of that is you have a large team that everybody's writing whatever they want in these spaces. It's really hard to get uniformity there. So this problem exists whether you're using Microsoft Word, if you're using a requirements management tool like Polarian, or if you're using an Excel spreadsheet, or you're using IBM Doors, or if you're using JAMA or any other management tool. At the end of the day, what you write in that natural language space is open. You can write whatever you want there. So that's where QVscribe helps with getting teams on the same page. And next we'll dive into the integrations that we have forthcoming. And before we do that, we do have another question. And so we'll do that part.
The next question is, what is the current roadmap for platform availability on Mac?
So right now, it's just runs within Word. So the only, within Windows, sorry. So the compatibility wise, it only runs within Word. We do have a customer that has a number of users that are on Linux. And for that, we have adopted a VDI setup that works really well for them. So users that are accessing it through Linux are able to run QVscribe through a VDI. So that's something that we could definitely explore with you. We're not currently developing for Mac, but there could be some ways to integrate that as well, especially with the new platform, which is web-based. So we're running within these management tools that are in the cloud or that are online, that are accessed through a browser. That would give us more flexibility to be able to integrate with some of those other processes as well. I did see a question there that the first part of this was missed. Yes, the recording will be made available. Everybody who registered will get a link to the recording as soon as it becomes available. You missed a story about wolves. You missed a little bit about the Lion King and a rant that I had about that. So you'll definitely want to go back and watch the first part if you missed that. But next part, I'm really excited about this, to share this as I drop my papers, is the new integrations that we have with requirements management tools. So the one I'm going to be showing today, the platform is actually the same across these different tools. So with JAMA, with Word and Excel, or with JAMA, Word, and Doors, there's different ways that we access QVscribe within that. But the window that I'm going to show you, the QVscribe interface, is the same across these different platforms. So you'll have a uniform experience if you have teams that are using different tools. When it comes to actually authoring the requirements and getting them on the same page with the way the requirement should be written, that experience will be common across these different platforms. So these are some screenshots from our QVscribe for Polarian build. So what you can see here, these are work items within Polarian. They have a unique document view where you can actually view a whole document without it being in sort of list form like you have in the other tools. So to work with that, we've actually added a QVscribe icon next to each requirement in the document itself. And when the user clicks that QVscribe icon, instead of just having the blank text where they can write whatever they want, they're actually getting a dashboard that's specific to QVscribe. So this is editable text over on the left-hand side. As they make changes to the requirement, the score is automatically updated. So it just waits for a 2-second pause. And you can see all of the quality issues are listed over on the right-hand side. So there's negative imperatives, in this case, superfluous infinitives. You can click those, they get highlighted on the document itself, and then you can make changes to it. So we understand that as part of the requirements management setup, it's important to see who's making changes, who has authority to go in and make changes. So when a user makes changes in QVscribe, when they exit out of this window, it takes them back to that view within Polarian with the updated requirement, and then they need to save it within Polarian. So that actually gives them the opportunity. That shows Polarian will show all of the changes that have been made. The requirement actually never leaves that tool. It all happens within the tool itself, and that's the same for JAMA, Doors, and Polarian. We do have another question.
Does QVscribe handle requirement statements that are written in multiple paragraphs, for example, bullet points in a statement, and treat them as part of the same requirement?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in using Word documents in particular, so the question was, does QVscribe look at a paragraph that has multiple requirements in it and treat each requirement as its own? When you're working with a Word document in particular, that introduces another level of ambiguity, because you can have paragraphs or bullet points within a particular paragraph that are separate requirements. So there is a process with Word that involves marking the requirements. So you're saying this is where this requirement begins and ends, and QVscribe will analyze it as such. So there is a process to, especially if you're using unique identifiers, you can manually or you can automatically scan the document and find those requirements. But as a best practice, those list forms should be singular. So at this time, when you're getting into working with a management tool later on, as a best practice, each requirement should be its own singular statement. So QVscribe would, you'd be able to mark them as such, but it would be recommended that you do split them into unique statements, as that's just a general best practice. Another question?
Does QVscribe work with user stories or shall statements only?
Yeah, so question is, does QVscribe work with user stories or shall statements only? It's been designed to work with requirement statements. So if you were working with user stories, for example, you could modify a configuration to be able to do that. There's nothing out of the box that is specifically designed for user stories, but we do have customers that are using it in all sorts of different ways that we didn't anticipate. So any technical document that you're working on where you want to control the language, there's definitely ways that you can adapt QVscribe to work for that. The biggest issue with working with user stories is the imperatives. So, you can still control the language of the other things, but it's checking to make sure, for example, with an imperative, that every requirement contains one of these words and that it's only present once. So if you have words like shall, must, will, things like that, those would be in your standard configuration. So you could modify that, for example, to just be something as simple as because that's how typical user stories work. As a project manager, I want to so that I can. If you have that in as your imperative statement, it's typically with user stories, the imperatives are less of an issue. So as long as you can satisfy that requirement, that each user story has a common phrase that's used in all of them, then all of your other types of analysis, so getting your vague words and non-specific temporal words and things like that, those are all automatically checked as well. So the short answer is no, we don't design for it, but yes, you certainly can use it in that way as well. Moving on here, so this is within QVscribe for Polarian. So they also have the tree view within this. So this is very similar. We've added a QVscribe icon next to each requirement. Also, when you're in the description where you're actually changing the text, this is where we insert another QVscribe icon. So we're actually right anywhere that you're editing a requirement when you have permission to do so, you can click the QVscribe icon and get to that same dashboard. So this is how you can improve the quality as you're writing individual requirements. And this is the same across all of the new platforms that we're developing for. So we call that the authoring workflow. And next is the review workflow. So in the review workflow, you're using the management tool to get a certain set of requirements. So that might be a document, or maybe you're using the filters within your management tool to filter out, only requirements that are in draft mode and are a part of a particular project and are involving a certain component, for example. So you can filter those results within your requirements management tool, and then click the QVscribe icon that's listed at the top of the screen, and that will take you into the review workflow. So in the review workflow of QVscribe, this is very similar to what we showed you within Word and Excel, where you get a unique quality score for each requirement. You can filter this by how they appear in the document or how they appear in that set versus filtering them by score or issue, but also by identifying what set of requirements you want to look at. Then you can start looking at the more advanced features like the term consistency, unit consistency, and similarity. So you've defined what set of requirements you want to look at, and now you're getting a unique quality assessment based on that particular set of requirements. So within the document view, it's the same thing. This will grab all the requirements within that document. And then you can also jump to a dashboard. So this is very similar to that PDF report that I showed you before. This is now available with the new platform for QVscribe without leaving the tool. So you can open this up and see at any time what the overall quality score is of this set of requirements. And you can see how many times each issue is present in the document itself. You can dive into any individual requirement from that view as well and make changes to it and commit those changes. And then also you have the list of terms and units consistency, very similar to what we have in the tools today. That's all present within this new dashboard within QVscribe for JAMA, for Doors, Next Generation, and for Polarian. So this is the similarity analysis. So like I mentioned earlier, if it finds a similar requirement based on that set that you've defined, we have the threshold set here to 85%. So it's going to show you any requirements that are at least 85% similar to the one that you're currently working on. And then you can see below that compared requirement. So these two are very similar. One says 2 kilohertz, one says 1 kilohertz. And other than that, they're pretty similar. So that appears to be a contradiction. So I can jump to that requirement or make the change here with that similar requirement as well. And then there's also a view where you can just look at all of the requirements that are at least 85% similar, and then you can set that threshold for yourself as well. Changes to the configuration, like I mentioned, these are synced automatically between Word and Excel users and users that are on a requirements management tool platform. So in this view, you can actually go in, make changes to those configurations the same way that we did within Word and Excel. Only users that are given permission to be able to make changes can make changes here. The other regular users, or what we call authors, can go in and see the configurations. They can see which words are included in each list, but they can't actually make changes or save new configurations themselves. And again, that's how we keep consistency across teams and keep everybody on the same page. So that was a quick tour of our new platform. We're really excited. Watch for that within the next month. We'll have the commercial release of the Doors version, and Polarian is coming next. But if you are using any of those tools, we do have alpha versions of each of them available. So if you'd like to connect with our team and get on board with an early access alpha license for that, we'd be able to set you up with that as well to get your feedback on it and make sure that it fits with the way that your team is using those tools as well. So we do have a question. This is the time. Go ahead, Olivia.
Does similarity analysis look at similar requirements from the meaning of the requirement or the syntax of the sentence?
Great question. So the question is, does requirements similarity look at the meaning of the requirement or the syntax? In the current commercial releases, we do have, it is syntactical. So it's just looking at the common words that are used. And that's why we're able to highlight, you know, this is where they're the same and this is where they're different with that percentage. We do also have an early access beta version available now just for Word and Excel that uses semantic similarity. So there's an NLP library there that we've worked with to find requirements that are not only similar in syntax, but similar in meaning as well. So certainly if that's a feature that interests you, we could talk about that beta that we have and show you that as well. All right, anything else for us now, Olivia? All right, so certainly in the last couple minutes here, if there are any other questions that you want to pose to us, please feel free to do so. You should have it by now. If you check your email, you will have a link to the survey. This requirement, or this tutorial is a lot different for us than our typical formula. So we definitely want to hear your feedback on it. If you'd like more like this about how to actually use the tool and how it works within organizations, we'd love to hear your feedback on it one way or the other. And then certainly, if you do fill that out, we'll be sending the PDF of this along as well. So you can have the whole presentation there. Everybody who registered will get a copy of the recording as soon as that's available. So we will send that out to everyone. Those of you that fill out the survey for us, will send the actual PDF presentation with some screenshots of the tool in there as well, including the preview that I just showed you for Polarian. But if you like what you see, we'd love to have a free one-on-one consultation with you. The idea is just to get an understanding of your current process. This obviously, something about this tutorial caught your attention, that you're at least yourself interested in improving your requirements or improving the process for your organization. So it just starts with a conversation. You know, we try to do a little bit of a gunshot approach with these tutorials because we've seen so many different approaches and so many different setups that people have in terms of what the process is that they follow. And so working with you to figure out how QVscribe could help your organization is really a key part of this whole process. So if there are specific questions that you had that we weren't able to answer here, or you'd just like to know more about pricing and how this fits into your team overall, we'd be happy to schedule that call with you. It's no pressure. We love learning about different processes, what's working for you, what current pain points you have, and we'd be happy to uncover that a little bit more with you and share some best practices that we've heard from other organizations as well. So following this, you will, well, you already received the email with the survey link. We'll also reach out to you, your specific contact that you have here at QRA. We'll reach out to you to offer a consultation or to offer to connect with you. And certainly if you're watching this afterwards on the recording, you can find the link below on the YouTube page to be able to connect with us as well. And you have my contact information there at the bottom. So we really appreciate you joining today. Are there any other questions right now, Liv? All right, I'll stick around for another couple minutes, but that wraps us up here today. If you have any other questions for us, I'll stick around to answer those on the live chat. Thanks again for taking the time, and we'll hope to connect with you again soon. Thank you.